Welcome, everyone. This is September 13th, 2023, and I welcome you on the behalf of the Association of Pittsburgh Priests. We are an organization that out of our common baptism, we are called to priesthood and to be prophets and to work for justice in our church and in our world. Our topic this evening is a synod of firsts and surprises, looking ahead on the Synodal Journey. And our speaker this evening is Kristen Colberg.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you. I grew up in Milwaukee and made many trips to Pittsburgh. And I have, over the past year of working with your team, come to know what a vibrant community this is. So I'm like so glad to be a part of it. So glad people want to talk about the Synod. Thank you so much for inviting me. Okay, so I have 40 minutes to walk through some highlights of the Synod. I'm going to share my screen because I always do this with a lot of images. Okay. Everyone, can you see my screen?
Yep. Yes, Kristen.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay, so let me see. I've got to. Okay. So I never know, and I know that some people on this call probably are here because they're really interested in, they know a lot about the Synod, and some people may know less and they're like, what is this Synod thing? So I want to start, the first part of my presentation is going to be the what, why, and how of synodality. And what you're going to find out in a minute or two is that synodality is really deeply rooted in the theology of Vatican II. So a few minutes talking about the connection between what's going on today and what was going on between 1962 and 1965. What has the listening church heard? So we engaged in this listening process, the largest ever global consultation. What did we hear? And then what does the future hold? So October 4th, the new extraordinary gathering of the delegates will meet in Rome. What are they going to be talking about, and what does that look like? And then I always put question and answer, question mark, not because we won't have questions and answers. You will definitely have questions, and I might have some answers. So just to say a word before I get started, just one more word of clarity. Thank you for the great introduction, Janet. So I just want to say a little bit about how did Kristen Colberg from Collegeville, Minnesota, why is she the person that's on this? When you work on Vatican I and Vatican II, you spend a lot of time talking about the Pope and the relationship between the Pope and the bishops. And this placed me on several ecumenical dialogues. So I've been on the ecumenical dialogue between Catholics and the Reformed tradition. So Presbyterians, United Church of Christ, the Christian Reformed Church of America. And I'm currently on the international dialogue between Catholics and Anglicans. That led me to be appointed. I'm the only theologian from the United States who is on the Theological Commission for the Synod. And then, as Janet mentioned, one of my tasks was being appointed by Pope Francis to be one of 3 people from North America that wrote the document, Enlarge the Space of Your Tent, if you're familiar with that document, which was, as Janet said, tried to bring into 30 pages a synthesis of what the people of God around the world said. So those are the lenses I'm bringing to this process. Okay, again, a very brief overview for just a couple people who might be new to this. Synods are really as old as the history of making decisions at the church. So the word synod and the word council are really synonyms. They mean the same thing. They are gathering of bishops that come together to pray together, to consider tradition, to discern, and usually to make binding decisions on the church. Okay. I bring that up because it's very interesting, because our current synod is not about making binding decisions. It's about consulting the Pope and giving him, feedback on what the people of God believe the Holy Spirit is calling the church to today. So some theologians in Rome, when we gather, question if actually the word synod is the word that we should be using, which I think is an interesting point. Okay, now she said I went to Notre Dame twice, so I had to take a picture of the Heisman Trophy here. I know Pittsburgh takes football seriously too. I say that because normally synods and councils in the history of the church have met in a defensive mode. Okay, usually they meet because something scary or threatening is going on in the world, and I like to say that synods and councils in history have often tried to stop a conversation. Okay, they're trying to maintain unity, so they are trying to establish what the clear practice or the clear teaching is, and then stop. They want to stop speaking. Okay, this may sound you might be like, Kristen, you're getting a little into the weeds here, but I promise you'll see where I'm going. These early councils and synods are based on the Roman Senate. Okay, so the early church takes the Roman Senate as its model. And the Roman Senate has the job of governing observable behavior. So the Roman Senate makes laws that govern practices that we can see. So most councils in history are teaching about observable behavior. Very interesting. Now here we get to our big exception. Vatican II is a very unique council in the history of councils. It's not trying to legislate observable behavior. Vatican II is about internal conversion. It's about updating. It's about aggiornamento. It's about meeting the needs of the modern world. So Vatican II is already a very unique council because its goals are different than the goals of previous councils. Previous councils meet, like I said, to make laws and legislate behavior. Vatican II is a messier council than that, because it's really trying to inspire people, and it's trying to update, and its language is homiletic. It's not legislate. It's not about legislating. So some of us who like Vatican II is about aggiornamento, which means updating, and ressourcement, which means return to the sources, return to scripture, return to the patristic tradition, return to images for the church, rather than scholastic language. So we can never have enough pictures of Vatican II in my mind. So here are some bishops leaving one of the sessions of Vatican II. Here is interior of St. Peter's during one of the working sessions.
You say that.
This is my favorite picture of Vatican II. Okay, I've seen a lot of pictures. I've written a lot of books on stuff on Vatican II. This is my all-time favorite picture, because at Vatican II, all these bishops from around the world are staying in every guest house, every seminary, every convent that has extra beds, and these buses would come in front of the basilica, and they would pick the bishops up, and they would take them to their meals, and they would take them to their places of residence. And so many of the diaries of the bishops of Vatican II say that the real work of the council got done on the bus, or got done in the meeting hall, or got done in the walking, because Vatican II was this moment of closeness for the world church. It was this moment of the world church coming to know each other. And a lot of times these bishops from South Africa and St. Cloud, Minnesota would sit next to each other on the bus, and they would say, what are the needs of the people in your diocese? Or you were working on the liturgy document today, and I was working on the, other document on other religions today. And there was real conversation about what the church needed. My favorite quote about Vatican II is an Irish bishop wrote in his diary that he went to Rome with these strict ideas about what he wanted the council to achieve, but in meeting his brother bishops and hearing the concerns of the world church, he wrote, I finally understood what it meant to say, Christ is the King of the world. And he let go of his assumptions and what he brought to the council to open himself to hearing what the world church had to say. So at the end of Vatican II, Paul VI recognized that this closeness was good for the church and that, it had promoted faith and conversation. So at the end of Vatican II, Paul VI instituted the regular meeting of synods as a way of kind of continuing the closeness and the work of the Second Vatican Council. Okay, so now we come to Pope Francis. So this is Pope Francis at his election, coming out for the first time. And then what does he do? He gets on the bus and he rides back with his brother bishops, and he goes and pays his hotel bill because he wants to make sure that, he's covered all of his bases. And shortly after his election, Pope Francis gave what many ecclesiologists think is the most important address of his papacy. It is October 17th, 2015, and it is on the anniversary of Paul VI instituting synods. So he's marking the anniversary of Paul VI instituting the process of synods at Vatican II. And this is the speech where Pope Francis says that synodality is what God expects of the millennium of the church in the third millennium. Okay, that synodality is the path that God is calling the church towards. Now, I went to doctoral work at Notre Dame, and I did 3 years of a master's degree at Yale, and never once did I hear the word synodality. Okay, we talked about synods, but no one had ever used the term synodality. So when Pope Francis calls for this originally, it's not clear what he means because it's not really a term that we use. Okay, this is really fun. Thank you for having me. So I like this picture too. Okay, so I like to tell my undergraduate students, these 19 and 20-year-old students, that I'm trying to get to think theology is interesting. It's not an easy way to earn a living, but when Pope Francis looks at the world, okay, he doesn't put on some Catholic goggles and say, where are there Catholic problems that I can solve? When Pope Francis looks at the world, he sees the same things that we see. He sees the war in Ukraine. He sees racial injustice. He sees economic disparity. He sees the lingering effects of COVID. He sees climate change. And Pope Francis looks at the world and he says, where can the Catholic Church lend its resources to these problems that inhibit human flourishing? So this is just a really fast slide because I love it. A lot of sociologists look at the world today and they say that the world is experiencing what they call VUCA. And VUCA means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Okay? It means that we can no longer predict the future like we used to. We can't use history to predict the future in the way that we used to. The world has become unpredictable. It's hard to comprehend. There's a lot of ambiguity. There's all these unknown unknowns and known unknowns. And if we look around the world and we say, okay, how do world leaders deal with VUCA? We see that a lot of leaders try to draw clear lines and make things black or white, and we see clear answers, and we see strength. I can give you stability in these uncertain times, and it's us versus them. And what I think is so amazing is that Pope Francis has responded to the same situation with listening. Okay, instead of trying to draw these lines and have these overly simplified clear answers, Pope Francis has called the entire church to to speak and to listen and to answer this question, what is the Holy Spirit calling the church to today? I'm going to skip a few things here. So we see that VUCA has led to polarization, but for Pope Francis, it's led to listening and an attempt at closeness. Okay, here's Pope Francis as a young man. So Pope Francis is the first pope since Vatican II that was not at Vatican II. Okay, so he wasn't a shaper. I mean, John Paul II was a very important figure at Vatican II, and it's arguable that Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict, was one of the most influential theologians at the council. So Francis is not a shaper of Vatican II. He was shaped by Vatican II. He was formed in the Vatican II church. Now I don't want to get too technical for you, but here's for you Vatican II lovers out there. I'm going to give you 1 minute of something critically important. If you want to understand the Synod, this is really important. So when Lumen Gentium got written, okay, the document on the church, it went through several drafts. Okay, the first draft, John the 23rd wanted to update the church. He wanted to make the church more open to the world. He wanted to make the church more of a pilgrim journeying with people throughout the world. But the first draft, we start with this idea that the church is the church militant, this kind of institutional, clear lines idea of the church. And all of the bishops rejected this as not what they wanted for the future and not what they thought John the 23rd was talking about. So the second draft, we get one of the most significant achievements of Vatican II, the idea that the church is primarily a mystery. Before it's about any structure, before it's about any rubric, before it's about any teaching, it's primarily a mystery and a sacrament of Christ's presence among us. Okay, now I promise only 1 more minute, but this is very important. So if we look at the third draft, if we look at the second draft, we see chapter number 2 is on the hierarchy. Okay, what's the role of the bishops? What's the role of the Pope? Which was a very important question after Vatican I. We had to talk about that. And then chapter 3 is this idea of the people of God, this idea that all the baptized share in the roles of priest, prophet, and king, the co-responsibility of the baptized. Now, here's my last technical slide. Hold on, I got it. If we look at chapter 2 and draft 2 and chapter 3, we see that in chapter 3, we invert the chapters. So now we're talking about the people of God before we're talking about the bishops and the hierarchy, okay? So what this says is that what unites us as Christians and Catholics is more important than what role we play in the church, okay? So Vatican II is telling us this very amazing thing that kind of goes back to the origins of the church, that baptism is the central identity of Christians, and that we as the people of God are bound to each other in a way that's more important than the differences in the roles that we play. So my good friend Orm Rush, who is a famous ecclesiologist, better than me, you guys should try to get him to come. He's from Australia. He says the most important thing that Vatican II does is it gives us a baptismal ecclesiology, a view of the church that is rooted in baptism instead of rooted in hierarchy, okay? So Vatican II gives us this amazing renewal of the church, this amazing way of thinking about the church. Sorry, my slide. Sometimes I have to click on the screen to get my slide. Okay. So when Pope Francis looks at synodality, what Pope Francis is saying is, I like the goals of Vatican II, this goal of updating, this goal of closeness. I like the style of Vatican II, not legalistic, but homiletic and inspiring. And I like the teachings of Vatican II. The church is a mystery, the people of God, the co-responsibility of the baptized. Now, one last one. This, for those of you who will appreciate this, this is Karl Rahner, who is a very important theologian and also a very hard theologian to read. So if you've ever studied theology, you have to curse Karl Rahner for how hard he is to read, but he's a genius. Karl Rahner said that councils, and he was referring specifically to Chalcedon, but he was saying councils are always an end and a beginning. They're always an end because they bring certain clarity and they answer certain questions. But they're always a beginning because in doing that, they raise new questions. So here's my punchline for tonight, my friends. Vatican II achieved many great things, but in other ways, it was very much a beginning. And Pope Francis says that we need to more deeply receive the teachings of Vatican II. We need to live out Vatican II. The Synod is a living out of the theology and the goals and the style of Vatican II and bringing them to greater reality than has yet been achieved. Okay, so I gotta watch my time here. I can get too excited about these things. So this is me at the opening of the Synod in October 2021. Was it 21, 22, 21? This is me standing in front of St. Peter's. This is the Pope's Instagram page from that day. And one of the monks from our monastery sent me this picture. I don't follow, I'm not an Instagram person. But he said, Kristen, you obviously didn't get the memo. You were supposed to wear black. Because I'm the only person in the crowd that's wearing, you know, a neon blue blazer. So when the Theological Commission got its directions from Pope Francis, what Pope Francis said is, I want you to probe the ecclesiology of the people of God. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, a huge word for the Synod is accountability. How do we hold ourselves accountable to the fact that we say that all baptized Christians are co-responsible? It's very easy to say everybody's co-responsible. It's very easy to say in some ways people are priest, prophet, and king. But what does that look like? What if we took, this is what Pope Francis says, what if we took the theology of Vatican II and this idea of people of God as our measuring stick? And we measured all of our structures on it, all of our vision of authority on it, all of our communication on it. What would the church look like if we fully lived the theology of Vatican II? So this is what a synod usually looks like. This is, I think, the synod on the family. This is a picture I just took off the internet. This is what a synod usually looks like. This is what the synod looks like when I have been a part of it. It looks like sitting around a table in an English language group and saying, what do you think the Holy Spirit is calling the church to today? So that's Cardinal Tagle from the Philippines. Many people think he will be the Pope within his lifetime, not maybe necessarily the next Pope. This is the Pope from Myanmar. The Cardinal from Myanmar. This man next to me is the head of the Catholic Journalists of Africa. This is a woman from Palestine over on the left. So talking. So I really think this next slide is really important. So on the left is like what a synod used to look like, and on the right is what the current synod looks like. And the rooms and the space and the way everyone is sitting says something theologically about what is going on here. I think we're seeing like a really dramatic shift. Okay, so what did the listening church hear? So I spent 3 weeks in Frascati, Italy, reading the reports that were submitted by the 112 countries about what they heard during their listening sessions. I'm going to go over this kind of quick because time is short. I love this picture, okay? Because here I am. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but there's me. This woman is from Africa. This woman is from Asia, South Korea. This is a sister who's an American, but she lives in Europe. The woman next to her is from Peru and South America. This woman's from Europe. This woman's from Australia. And it's all of us just sitting around. We were talking about, what do these documents say about the clericalism in the church? So we had this like really meaningful 2-hour conversation. So I like ran out into the hall and I literally just got like the bellman and I was like, could you come in here and take our picture? And I did not realize that we were standing next to this banner that like makes it look like Pope Francis is listening to us. And the next day on the Vatican's website, they had this picture with the caption, Pope Francis listens to women. Okay. All right. So everyone always asks, so Kristen, you read these reports, like what was the biggest takeaway from these reports? And I will tell you that's a very easy answer because it's clear as a bell to me. The biggest takeaway from these reports from 112 countries around the world, millions and millions of people listen to, is how similar they are. How people of God around the world want the same things. They want the church to be synodal. They don't want to go back. They want to be a listening church. They like synodal structures. One of the bishops said that synodality is like a disarmament process. Like it lets us talk to each other. It overcomes polarization. The one comment I heard the most is people want more formation. I love this quote from Zimbabwe. The thirst for formation runs through almost every synod submission. People want more formation. They could participate more. We could overcome clericalism. We could bring youth in if we had more formation. We want more participation. We want more people to participate, and we want people who participate to be able to do more stuff. We want a new style of leadership. We don't want authoritarian leadership. We want synodal, smell like the sheep leadership. We want better homilies and more vibrant liturgies. We ache at the loss of youth. We want the church to be more enculturated into certain cultures that can't pray, don't have prayer books in their own languages, and don't feel the church is really adapting to their needs. And in Europe, people worry that the gulf between the church and culture is so great that it can't be bridged. Okay, what is coming next? So October 4th. This is, I don't know how much you know about, so after we wrote enlarge the space of your tent, that document got sent back to each continent, the seven continents in the synod, and they had to give their feedback. And then the result was this Instrumentum Laboris, which is the document that they use as actually the working document at the synod. And what's crazy, like mind-blowing, is that it's really a series of worksheets. It's not like, usually what a synod does is they have a text and that they're editing it together. So someone will raise their hand. It will be like, in paragraph 3, I think that word is too strong and we should change that word. Rather than editing a text, it's all questions. It's really based in questions. And we're going to look at a few of them in a minute. So it's going to start with this ecumenical prayer service. And then it is going to, all the participants need to, the man on the right is Father Timothy Radcliffe, who's a Dominican, and he's going to lead all the participants in a retreat outside of Rome to bring them into a prayerful space and say, this is about prayer. This is about formation. This is not about creating documents. This is not about data. This is about being formed as a synodal church, listening, accompaniment. Okay, so what are we trying to do in Rome? My friend from Venezuela, Rafael Luciani, who I think has written the most helpful book on synodality, he says that, we're trying to aim for a synodalization of the whole church. We're trying to transform the whole church to be synodal, to be listening, to be accompanying, to be co-responsible. Okay, I don't like to have too many words on my screen, but these words were necessary. So the Instrumentum Laboris says something really important, which I think your group will appreciate. It says, without diminishing appreciation for the sacrament of orders, ministries in a synodal horizon and a synodalization are understood from a ministerial conception of the entire church. A serene reception of the Second Vatican Council emerges with recognition of baptismal dignity as the foundation of everyone's participation in the life of the church. That's why I went over that Vatican II chart with you about the chapters, because what this is saying is that, I think I have a slide on this, hold on. Yeah, where does authority in the church come from? It's been a little bit of, a debate in the church. Does it come from the sacrament of orders, or does it come from baptismal dignity and common priesthood? And the Instrumentum Laboris is saying it comes primarily from baptismal dignity, and sacrament of orders flows out of that. So that's, like, in my mind, a major reset for the church, for giving this rationale for the sensus fidelium, for all of our participation. Again, when we have baptismal dignity as our starting point, we have an ecclesial synod. When we have sacrament of orders as our starting point, we have a synod of bishops. So the room matters. The room is telling us what authority looks like and who has authority and where does authority come from. Okay, now we also have in the synod expanded voting. So we have 70 non-bishop voting members of the synod. We have never had women voting at the synod. So now we have 35. I can't remember, it might be 40. Because Pope Francis mandated that every continent submit 20 names of non-bishops who they wanted to see as voting members, and Pope Francis selected 10. So each continent turned in 20. Pope Francis picked 10, and he said half of every list must be women. So, for example, from the United States, the one on the left is Dr. Cynthia Bailey Mans, who also lives here in Minnesota with me. And on the right is a college student. So one of the U.S. delegates is from Philadelphia, goes to St. Joseph, and her name is Julia. And there's 2 college students that are attending from the U.S. delegation. I like to say that women voting at the synod and expanded voting at the synod is a fruit and a seed. It shows us, it's not that the synod went poof and now things have changed, women get to vote. The synod is recognizing that things have already changed. Things have already changed, and the synod is reflecting that. So the women voting at the synod is a fruit of changes that have already been made, and it's a seed for the future. Because these are my daughters, 15 and 17. And I like to tell my daughters to aim for the highest heights of their careers and their professions. And one of the only places that they can't reach the highest heights is if they choose to have a career in the Catholic Church. And I need my daughters to be patient. I don't like to ask people for patience, but I need my daughters to be patient and hang in there and see what's going to come of this church of the future. And what I have tried to tell the synod again and again as a mother and as a college teacher is that if you want people to have patience, you have to be giving them experiences of joy, of Christ, of community. Because if there's no experience, there's no patience. Okay? So, like, getting things right in the church is not all about the wording. It's not all about the teachings. And it's not all about, changing this or that. The church is messy, and communal discernment is messy, and we need to give people experiences that keep them journeying with us while we discern our path for the future. Okay, so I know my time's running out. I'm going to leave us with a couple just things. Now, my mind is blown by these questions. Okay, who would have thought 20 years ago, 5 years ago, that the Catholic Church would be asking these are the questions from the Instrumentum Laboris. I mean, there's hundreds. I've just picked a sample. But I mean, hope for our church. Okay, question here. How can we create spaces where those who feel hurt by the church and unwelcome by the community feel recognized, received, free to ask questions and not judged? I love this question. It's such an important question. Should bishops discern together with or separately from the other people of God? Do both options, together and separately, have a place in a synodal church? This, my friends, in my mind, is accountability to co-responsibility. Are the bishops going to deliberate with the people of God or separately? That is not a detailed, small question. Every time I touch my screen, how can the church of our time better fulfill its mission through greater recognition and promotion of the baptismal dignity of women? Most of the continental assemblies and the synthesis of several Episcopal conferences call for the question of women's inclusion in the diaconate to be considered. Is it possible to envision this, and in what way? I think this is the last one. What concrete steps can the church take to renew and reform its procedures, institutional arrangements, and structures to enable greater recognition and participation of women, including in governance, decision-making processes, and in the taking of decisions in a spirit of communion and with a view towards mission? Okay, I hope I haven't lost you all along the way. But I'm hoping, if I could leave you with one idea, it's just that I have so much hope for our church right now. People around the world, people in my classrooms, people in my community, my parents, my relatives, many years have said the Catholic Church doesn't listen. It's not listening to me. It doesn't know what I want. It doesn't ask me. The time for listening is now. Okay? And I always try to say to people, this is just my opinion. I don't know how Pope Francis could do anything more radical than what he is doing, because he is really trying to make a lasting change. He's not just mandating something from the center that some people might rebel against. He is like gaining like groundswell. And then what he comes up with is going to have just such foundation. So, okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Is what happens after October, between October and October of 2024?
I know, you have a wise group. Because that's a great question. The answer to that is nobody knows. I will tell you something. I like the term surprises and firsts, because the Synod is, and some people find this unsatisfying, but in my experience of working with the Synod for multiple years, the Synod is very spirit-driven process, and it is not over-planned. I'm a planner. You can ask my husband. It drives him crazy. I am the queen of the planners. And to be honest, the Synod is like really unfolding in real time. So in one way, I think we don't know what's going to happen between those two dates, because they want to wait to see what's going to happen this October. Also, my best guess, and I'm sorry to all of you out there who this is going to affect deeply, we're going to have it go back to the local churches for some kind of listening in some form. It is going to come back to the local churches for further rounds of discernment. But let me tell you one quick story, since we do have a little time that would illustrate this. So when I went to Rome the first time for the opening of the Synod, I think some of the graphics for the Synod are really great. And if you can remember, there was a timeline for the Synod. It was like blue and white. And it stated that, the Synod started in October, and that by April, all the dioceses had to have an opening mass, listening sessions, and they had to submit their reports of 10 pages to the USCCB, or their National Episcopal Conference. Okay, so that's like November, December, January, February, March, April, 6 months. I was in many meetings in Rome during the opening of the Synod where bishops would say, no way, no way. There is no way that can happen in 6 months in a way that has integrity and authenticity. So a certain group of bishops made a request to Pope Francis, can you extend the deadline? We don't think we're all here right now. We've never even heard of this. We have to go home and we have to make this happen in 6 months. So they said, could you give us till the end of the summer? Now, some other bishops said, I was not in the room where they said this to Pope Francis, so I am relaying to you secondhand. Other bishops said to Pope Francis, you have all these graphics out. You just opened the Synod. It says April. If you change so early such a significant detail, it's going to make the Synod look like it doesn't know what it's doing. You're going to lose confidence in the Synod because you're going to look like you didn't have a good plan. So even if April's not perfect, no amount of time is ever going to be enough. Just keep it at April. And those of us who are involved in the process know Pope Francis sided with extending it to August because he said the Synod is about listening. And if the people of God and my brother bishops are telling me they need more time, then I'm going to listen. And I'm not going to get too worked up over the fact that some people are going to think that means we didn't know what we were doing. I offer that story to answer the question of this is not a rigid plan that Pope Francis is working, step by step by step. This is a process that is really being formed as it goes. And I know, I'm not trying to brag, but I know people at the highest levels of the Synod, and I'm telling you, what's happening between October and October is not sitting on a shelf somewhere to be unveiled. It is a work in progress.
Thanks, Kristen. Ann Zimmer, I'd like to call on you. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, Kristen. Thank you. We in our parish are pretty involved in trying to follow the Synod process. And anyway, I would like to know your suggestions for the universal phase that we're in right now. I know the Instrumentum Laboris is not really, in some ways, written for a lot of lay people, some of the terminology and things. But if you had to put together something for the local parish to journey along on this phase, what would you do?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. I've actually been thinking about that a lot myself. I'll just tell you what I'm planning on doing. I have really been transformed by the process of synodal conversation. So, for example, I am not sure if any of you or if you're aware of the work of Father Brian Massengale. Father Brian Massengale just spoke at our school last night and gave the most amazing presentation, but it was very hard to hear and difficult and very challenging for some people. For those of you who don't know Father Brian Massengale, he is a priest of the Diocese of Milwaukee. He teaches at Fordham, and his specialty, he teaches ethics, but he will say to you in the first 2 minutes of meeting him, he's an African-American Catholic priest who identifies as part of the LGBTQ community. And he really calls the Catholic Church to be more inclusive and about harm that it has caused to people in those communities. Anyway, So I have my students today in my room, and it's hard for us to have a 20-person conversation because there's so many people who heard it differently in our anyway. So we sat in tables of 5, and we had every person spoke for like following the synodal conversation. Silence, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, silence, building on what someone said in the first round. And it has made, in my teaching career in the last couple of years, kind of impossible conversations possible. So I am going to do something at our campuses where we're going to take some of the questions off the Instrumentum Laboris that are accessible. And if I have to like edit them for clarity, I don't have a problem editing. Don't tell Pope Francis, but I will edit them. And then have a, I think the power of a synodal conversation, and also this power of not even just looking at the questions on the Instrumentum Laboris, but just going back to that fundamental question, which is, what do you think the Holy Spirit is calling the church to today? And I will tell you that somebody at the Synod office reads every single email that is submitted to the Secretariat for the Synod. So if you have a conversation in your parish and you send it to them, it will be read. They have a team of people that read that. And I think that matters to my students when I tell them this is about forming us, and this is about us learning from each other, but this is going to be submitted to the Secretariat and offered up. I mean, I think the Synod is asking us to participate in this process, even if we're in Pittsburgh and not in Rome. And I think that we can share that with the Synod. And, definitely I've been in meetings many, many, many times where someone has said, quoted an individual contribution that came in through the email. Those things are really listened to. So that's a lot. I'm trying not to be so long-winded, but Anne, my answer is I would have a synodal conversation because they're incredibly transformative. I would try to use it off of the Instrumentum Laboris, or I would just say, what are your hopes for the Synod? And then I would compile them and I would send them to the Secretariat.
Kristen, I'm going to combine two questions. They're very similar, but one is people are so used to the US CCB not listening to us, and there's a lot of pushback. Many of the bishops are anti-Pope Francis. And so what do we do with that? And then the second one is what happens, we're not going to have Pope Francis forever. What happens post Pope Francis? Does this have a life after him?
Yeah, man, this is a great group. Okay, on the USCCB question. So when I was traveling during the national phase of the Synod and the local phase, one of the I have a list of my 5 most common questions that I would get asked. And one of them was, how do we know the bishops aren't going to just filter out all of the responses so that what makes it to Rome does not really represent the concerns and the frustrations of the people of God? Okay. So I think that there's always, throughout this process, been a concern, not just in the US, but definitely in the US, that Pope Francis is calling people to speak, but we don't want to just feel like placated, like token, like you got to talk and it didn't really matter. And we are concerned that the bishops' conference might be a place where some of our concerns get filtered out. So one thing I'd say is like, that is a longstanding concern. And in meetings in Rome, multiple people have voiced that concern to the Secretariat. And I know that the Secretariat, has said things like, they're not a sanitized report. They don't read a sanitized report and think, oh, there must not be any problems in the U.S. church because none of them got voiced. Like, they're aware of the same danger of filtering. Now, what I will say is I had all these concerns, and I lament the polarization in the U.S. Catholic Church. And some of the things that the U.S. Catholic Church has chosen to really give a lot of energy to are not necessarily the way I would give my energy. Let's put it that way. But I think the U.S. National Report is beautiful. So if you have not read the 10 pages of the U.S. National Report from the Synod, you absolutely must do that, because it's an incredibly beautiful document. That it is surprising. Talk about a synod of surprises. It is an absolute surprise to me that a church as polarized as ours could have come up with such a beautiful, authentic document. Okay, so I would read that. That gives me incredible hope for our church. And then, I would also, to be honest, I would pray. Prayer is important here. I would pray for our church and the leadership of our church. And, another one of the most common questions that I would get asked all the time when I would do it is, number one question: what can I do if my priest or bishop is not doing anything about the synod? That's always number one question. Okay. And one of my answers to them would be like, have you asked them why they're not doing it? Have you said to your priest, like, why aren't we doing something for the synod? I think a lot of priests felt very overwhelmed by the synod. It came right on the heels of COVID. There was such a decline in church attendance. There was a decline in giving. And I think that some priests didn't really get great guidance on it, and they felt lost and they felt overwhelmed. And some of them didn't participate because they have, as somebody mentioned in the chat, they have concerns about Pope Francis. And so they were like making an active choice. And some of them just were like, I can't do one more thing and I'm not getting enough guidance. So I would say, who could you ask your bishop? Could you write a letter to the USCCB? Could you ask your priest, dialogically, help me understand why we're not doing something? Or I want to do something. Could I take the lead on it? Because part of being a synodal church, I'm not going to share this. I'll say one more story, but I'm not going to share who this came from. I had a colleague who was a member of the Theological Commission from a different country. And the person said to me, you know what, my bishop's conference, they're not using my gifts. Like, they've never contacted me and said, you're part of the Theological Commission. Can you help, can you help us, figure this out? And I heard this person, and the first time they said it, it was kind of like in one ear. Oh yeah, I'm sorry they didn't do that, But the third time I heard it, I said, why didn't you reach out to them and ask them? And so I sent a letter to the USCCB and I said, I'm on the Theological Commission. How can I help you? So how can you take the initiative to not just lament what is not, not that there's not room for lament. I'm not saying something critical, but flip it a little bit and say, how can I offer it? And also pray for the USCCB, read the document because it's actually really hopeful, and consider sending a letter to the USCCB, especially the Synod office, and say, here's what I'd like to see, because those letters get read too. I can't remember the second question.
Well, what happens? We won't have Pope Francis forever.
Yeah.
So do you see life after Pope Francis with this new approach to our journey?
I do. I mean, Pope Francis has appointed, first of all, so many of the cardinals. So like when we go, I've been, so the last time I was at a meeting for preparing for the Synod, one of the big topics was, what should October look like? What should October 2023 look like? What should the plan for that be? And I mean, just after a week of like reflecting on this together and always doing these synodal conversations and praying the prayer we started with, it was passionate among the people that were there. We want the bishops to talk to each other. Okay. We want October 2023 to be about spiritual formation, not about producing documents. Okay. So like we want the bishops to be transformed by this synodal process and this time in Rome and this experience of closeness. So I think there's a real, like one thing that these bishops, when I meet with these bishops, you know what the first thing that they say is? Like they say, people are always talking about the bishops, but they're like, we don't know each other. We're not like this big group that has like this plan. Like we want to know each other and we want more formation. So I guess what my hope is that these bishops are going to go to Rome and they're going to have a transformational experience of the Holy Spirit, of encounter with Christ, of hearing delegates from all around the world that are bishops and non-bishops, and that they are going to bring that back to their churches. And if you look at who was chosen from around the world by the Episcopal conferences to represent their conference, not always people who were totally in love with the Synod, So I think it is a chance for transformation, the process, the retreat, the 24 days together. So I think that Pope Francis is transforming the church through this. I think that means that it can carry on after him. I think that he's appointed cardinals that, that's what all popes do, appoint cardinals that have theologies that they want to, and pastoral practices they want to hold up. So I think this way goes beyond Francis. And I'll just say one last thing. One of the purposes of the talk that I gave, and sometimes I give a longer, perhaps more boring version, is that when you understand the theology of synodality, it is not Pope Francis's back pocket. It is the theology of Vatican II being more deeply received. It's not just Pope Francis popped up and this is what he cares about. So I think the Synod has legs galore because of its theological roots in the Council, because of the experience people are going to have in Rome, and because of the way he's shaped the cardinals, and because the Holy Spirit is working in our church today. I mean, that is just totally clear to me.
Thank you for that response. We have one. We're struggling in Pennsylvania to extend the statute of limitations on sexual abuse. And the wonderment of this person is, what does the future hold on this type of issue? The church doesn't seem to be fully supportive of victims of sexual abuse.
Yeah. Well, thanks you guys for all these easy questions. I just love the softballs you guys are throwing me on Wednesday night. The Catholic Church is a big place, and I think that I am very good friends with someone who is on the Papal Commission for Child Protection, and that commission is doing amazing things. So I think there's absolutely places in the Catholic Church that have done not nearly enough and have been inadequate in their response. But I think that there's places that really important things are happening. I also think that, one thing I've learned that's so interesting to me is 3 years ago, I would have told you, sorry for anyone out there I'm about to offend, that canon law is really boring. And why would anybody study canon law? It is dry, dusty bones, okay? But a third of the theological commission for the Synod are canon lawyers. Because what the canon lawyers are saying is that Vatican II has never fully transformed the canon, the code. And that if we want accountability in the church, it requires not just theological development, but also canon law. And I think that I know of a particular group of canon lawyers that are working very hard on the canons related to child protection. And again, I have to use that, I don't like to ask people to wait. And I don't like to say to people like, okay, we're doing something. I always say patience is a luxury. And patience isn't the same, experienced the same by everyone. Okay. So like, I don't personally feel a call to be a woman deacon. I don't have that vocation. Okay. So I can have patience, like while the church figures that out, because it's not impacting my life, because I'm not feeling like my gifts in that way are not being utilized. But for people who really feel like that they have that call and that their gifts are not being recognized, and that they might live their whole life without being able to act out something that they think that's part of who they are, they have to have patience in a different way than I do. Okay. We could use that example with many different people in the church. So it's not that I'm like taking joy in saying, don't worry, there's great things going on in certain places, and we hope that's going to transform the whole church. Like, but I do think that great things are happening in the world of canon law, in the world of the Vatican, so the Child Protection Commission. And sometimes it's been very interesting for me to see the church from a more global perspective and realize that the way that things are handled in the U.S. is we should not assume that that is the world church. So that's part of it, part of an answer.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a question about expectations around decisions. Is there any to be expected this October, or will things be sent back to the people of God to discern? What do you think about this as a possibility? And what about after October 2024?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, dang, whoever asked that question ruined me, because they took my answer and made it the last part of their question.
Yeah.
So, in obviously October 2024, a report will be submitted to Pope Francis. I mean, Pope Francis is very involved. When I was writing Enlarge the Space of Your Tent, he read drafts, he gave feedback. He's incredibly involved in the day-to-day life of the Synod. So, the big things of the Synod, I guess, if we were following a normal pattern, which we're not necessarily, would be like February 2025, 4 or 5 months after October 2024, some major document will be issued by Pope Francis as like the apostolic exhortation coming out. So, that would be one place to look. But I mean, who knew women were voting at the Synod? Who knew, a million things. Like, who knew Pope Francis was going to ask every Catholic in the world to share freely what they want to see in the Catholic Church? Somebody that I really admire is Cardinal Walter Casper. I don't know if anybody knows his writing, but I've edited a book on him. He's a good friend of mine. Cardinal Casper says that, in ecumenism, you work hard. You work hard and you don't see any change. For a long time, you don't see change, or you see slow change, or and you have to do that work. You have to do that work of the academic part. Like, what do these people believe? You have to pray together as possible. You have to like engage in justice or charity together to get to know each other. And he says, but ultimately, the gift of Christian unity will always be the gift of the Holy Spirit. It's never going to be our achievement. It's something that we work towards, and that will be a gift that we receive when it comes. And he also says that while we work hard and we think nothing's changing, he says that people who walked by the Berlin Wall the day before it fell thought that wall is going to be standing there until my great grandchildren are alive. And then one day it just wasn't there anymore. So don't doubt the possibility of the Synod to surprise us, for Pope Francis to do something big, for the Holy Spirit to bring about something big. I mean, one thing that I didn't mention, I'll just say this very quickly because it might be not, I mean, never in the 2,000 years of the Catholic Church has the Catholic Church discerned together as continents. Never, okay? We have thought many, many, many times in our history, okay, we have the Rome level and we have the local level. Like, how do we do the in-between, and then we fight, blah, 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 blah. We couldn't figure it out, so we've never done it. Then one day Pope Francis says, everyone's going to deliberate on the continental level, and it happened, So sometimes change is slow, sometimes change is fast. I don't know, like what are the actual teachings going to be? I mean, one answer is going to be Pope Francis is doing something more important, perhaps, than changing particular things by changing decision making, and that when he changes the structures of decision making, then the changes will follow. One possibility is it's really not about, okay, here's the 10 things we're going to change. It's about, here's how we're going to make decisions. And then that brings about something. Or I would not put it past Pope Francis at all to say, I have unanimously heard the people of God say this, or I prophetically heard a small portion of the people of God say this, and then we'll see, what topics he chooses.
Yeah, great. We do have a request from one of our participants. Will you come back after the October 23 sessions?
I would definitely, this is a fun group. I would definitely come back. You might have heard all my pearls tonight, so I don't know if I got more gold, silver and gold to share, but I definitely would be willing to consider, if you guys would actually would like to have more of a session where we did a little bit more small groups where people were talking to each other, and I could maybe do some facilitating of that.
Very good. Well, thanks for your willingness. Yeah, you're wonderful.
I'm totally willing to come back, but now I think you guys know everything I know. So
yeah.
I don't know what
you
more
never
to
know
say.
everything. Jim Ruck, you have a question.
Yes, a lot of the American bishops and others that are resisting the Synod see that it's threatening the church as they know it and feel is the true church. Have you experienced anybody, either not necessarily at the extreme of that, but anybody that's been resistant being converted to seeing the possibilities of it?
Sure. Yes. Yes, I have. I gave a talk a little bit ago, and somebody stood up in the back. And the person I'm referring to was really a person of goodwill, and a person of faith. And they said, I'm worried that this is just open mic night in the Catholic Church. And where are the guardrails? That, Pope Francis is very clear that synodality is not democracy. It's not just a counting of heads, that it is a spiritual discernment. So I have encountered many people who have thought that, to use a theological expression, that the Synod is too loosey-goosey with the tradition. And where's our clear identity? And just hoping that the Synod will go away. And also people who, are going to be frustrated when they don't see the fast changes that they want to see. So absolutely, I have heard real serious complaints from people, some people who were yelling that I couldn't hear, literally, because their tone was not dialogical and like I don't understand where they're coming from, and other people that I do kind of understand where they're coming from. And and none of us wants we're here because we love the church and we love we love its tradition and we love a lot of parts of its identity. So we're not trying to water that down. We're trying to be more authentically who we are. Okay. And we're trying to be our best self. Anyway.
Yeah, Jim will get it up running again.
Yeah, no worries. So yes, definitely. And also ways that it was handled. Okay, here's an example. So every continent of the 7 continents, when they had to have these continental sessions. So what the Vatican said was, take this, enlarge the space of your tent, which you should also read that document. It's life-changing, okay? If you want to feel hope for the Catholic Church, read Enlarge the Space of Your Tent. So all the continents were supposed to read that document. I think it's like 25 pages. And then they were supposed to reflect on it in a spiritual synodal way. Well, the U.S. is the only one of the not the U.S., North America, which was the U.S. and Canada, were the only ones that held their sessions virtually, okay? They did not gather in person. They had 2-hour virtual sessions because they felt more people could be included virtually than could be gathered for any amount of time in person. People have criticized all over the world. People have criticized that like very strongly, saying that it's not the same as praying together, eating together, coming together, worshiping together. And so there's been, in certain portions, again, I love, this is not I'm just sharing with you critiques. In certain portions of the synod, sometimes the bishops meet separately and sometimes bishops meet with the people of God. And I've seen very severe criticisms of why are the bishops ever meeting separately? Like they should be meeting with the baptized that they are a part of. So I see not only critiques of the whole synod process, but certainly critiques of like how the synod has transpired. And I think that's, if those are done in goodwill and in prayer, maybe they help us be better.
Great. Just affirmation. A person said yes, they would like small groups. So keep that in mind if we call on you, Kristen. And if you have a minute closing remarks, we'd love that if you have something to close with.
I mean, to me, this has been such a fun hour and a half. Thank you for having me. It's fun to talk to all of you. And it, even though I've heard these things many times, okay, and I said them, they're exciting to me. I mean, who would have thought, honestly, what's going on? It's hard to realize sometimes when you live in historic times because it's all around you and you feel, oh yes, this is just happening. This is an amazing time in the church. It is so exciting, and the synod only exists when we live it into reality. So all of you participating in the synod, trying to initiate synodal conversations, like I want to just tell you, like that matters. It really, really matters. So thank you. Thank you for having me. In putting this presentation together, I learned some things. So I'm really grateful to all of you. And I've appreciated your questions, and I will read through the rest of the chat. There's some really good stuff in there. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Kristen.